So good afternoon, everyone, and you are in parallel session 3.3, decolonizing institutions and governance, moving from rhetoric to reform. In fact, someone yesterday mentioned, why are we talking about reforms? We should be talking about transformation. So let's see. My name is Tu Ba Huing, and I'm a senior technical advisor at FHI 360. And I will be moderating our session this afternoon. I want to begin this session by acknowledging the fact that it has not been an easy journey for us to start talking about this topic and unpacking, and decided that this is the topic for PMAC 2024. Everyone understands this is an important topic, but to be able to open the discussion and find the right entry points has not been easy, but this is an important topic. And as we heard over the past couple of days, I think you've seen a lot of elephants already, but I have this elephant because when I was growing up, my grandmother always say, don't think you know about the elephant if you only know a trunk or a tail, or, you know, a leg, a part of the elephant. The elephant is huge, and I know a lot of us know this symbol already, that, you know, if you are blind, these are all the blind, supposed to be blind guys, and if you touch on part of the elephant and you think that you can describe the entire elephant. So that's what she used to tell me. So it's different story from the big and small elephant, but it's more about, like, how you know about the topic and how you interrogate the topic. And so, yeah, another elephant. I hope that by all of us here, we can walk away knowing the real shape of the elephant without just knowing a tail or ears or a leg. And so why we have this session, we all aware that global health as currently practiced has many asymmetries in power, privilege, and there's a need for us to interrogate these unfair power imbalances at global, regional, national, and local level. And it is important for us to unpack these terms, really understand it, and understand the implications of it in our work. And as we heard over the past 2 days, there are many suggestions on how to decolonize. And the common view is to shift power to local ownership. But clearly there is no practical or maybe a commonly agreed plans on how to achieve this. And so this session aims to really tease out this on a very practical terms, what it means to us, and maybe discuss practical ways to start on how to embark on or continue this journey more meaningfully together. So as I mentioned, the session is 2 hours. We start with a keynote speech, followed by a panel discussion, and feel free to ask questions, and I will open the Q&A to the audience as well. So let's kick off. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Tessie Saint-Martin, Chief Executive Officer for FHI 360, who will deliver our opening remarks. Dr. Saint-Martin brings decades of leadership experience spanning the public, private, and non-profit sectors. Prior to joining FHI 360, she served in senior executive roles at organizations including the World Bank Group and the PricewaterhouseCoopers. When I invited Tessie to the session, I knew that she was such a forceful advocate for aid effectiveness. But what I didn't know was that she also holds a PhD in political economy and government from Harvard University, which makes her an ideal keynote speaker for today's discussions. Please join me to welcoming Dr. Tessie Saint-Martin.
Well, first of all, I appreciate Tuba saying that I have decades of experience, because at one point she said, well, I'm going to say you have, at least 20 years of experience. Is that too much? And I said, oh no, honey, you can go higher than that. So anyway, so thank you for the opportunity to be with you here today and frame this conversation. So, when Tuba and I were talking about what this session was about, we agreed, right, that we wanted to see if we could make it sort of really practical and take it from rhetoric, because we've been hearing a lot of rhetoric over the last, day and a half. Because these are really big topics and they're very complex, and we're trying to break them down in 2-hour segments. So I'm going to try to, so the topic of, decolonizing institutions and governance, moving from rhetoric to reform, what we're going to take maybe a part of the elephant, and maybe that'll help us understand the broader elephant. So I'm really going to be talking about decolonization in the context of foreign assistance. When we talk about, forces in our world that have really influenced how we think about improving global health and global health systems, foreign assistance has been, a major actor. Different donors, particularly, right, from the global north, have influenced our sense of what are priorities, what needs to be funded, who is to be doing the execution, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to be talking about decolonization in that context. Now, decolonization, right, as we know, really sort of refers about addressing these historic power imbalances. I'm going to be talking about 2 strategies to help move us in, along that path towards decolonization. I'm going to be talking about localization and locally led development, because decolonization is a really broad topic. So if we want to move from rhetoric to reform, we have to start thinking about so what are some practical steps that have been taken, and what have we learned? So I want to talk about those 2 things. And first, I guess a couple of definitions. Localization, so we all understand it the same way, really does refer to transferring the, funding and the responsibility for executing program from usually, right, an international global north player to a local partner. We can then talk about what local means, and we will. But that's what it's referring to. It is taking existing power structures, decisions about what to fund, what are priorities, what are legitimate concerns of the, of the donors. It's taken all of that as a given. It's just simply saying it used to be implemented by this Global North organization. Now it's going to be implemented by a local partner. And we can talk about, well, how significant that is. Locally led development is a little broader, a little broader term. And it's important because in locally led development is where you bring in the concept of voice, right? Localization, nobody's necessarily asking the local partner whether that was the right design. Nobody actually necessarily involved the local partner in the actual design or decisions about how to execute. In locally led development, you're supposed to be making an effort, right, to really bring in, welcome, make the space for, however you want to put it, and all of those are loaded terms, local voices. Now, the question is, again, whose voices are usually heard in that whole thing? So those are the 2 terms I'm going to be talking about, 2 strategies to move us on this continuum, to advance decolonization. All 3 of them, decolonization, localization, locally led development, share one thing in common, which I think is a good thing, is they do question the status quo, right? They ask us to consider, are we doing the right things? Do we have the right priorities? Are the right people being, included in important conversations about what to do, what to prioritize, and so And I think that's fair. And there are many reasons to be questioning the status quo, and we're way overdue for it. I think there are two major reasons for it. One reason to question the status quo is, if you think about the world for which, assistance in global health was developed, and all of that donor funding that's going to global health. It was a world that assumed that the recipients were going to be generally low resource, but generally stable settings. Well, that's not the world in which we're operating today. We're not in stable settings. In fact, what we're seeing is a world of fragility. That's actually a concept that has come up from time to time, but it's worth acknowledging that most of that the world, to me anyway, at times does seem like it's on fire. We're dealing in a world that an operating context that are highly kinetic, context of high displacement. Context of great fragility. And it's worth asking whether the tools, the approaches, the frameworks that we have for global health make any sense in those kinds of settings. I had an opportunity to be in, to look at our programming in Ukraine some months ago, and as some speakers in side events earlier this week noted, so Ukraine is an interesting place, right? Because you're doing humanitarian work and you're also doing development assistance. And and one of the things that we're doing in Ukraine, one of the programs that we're supporting is in HIV. Now, the approach to, managing the epidemic is, 95, 95, 95, right? You're supposed to, identify 95% of those who are infected, et cetera, et cetera. Well, how do you do that in a country where you have millions of people that have been displaced? Where are those people? If I at some point knew where they were, I can guarantee you they're not there anymore, particularly because so much of that funding was going to eastern Ukraine, which has been in the middle of a giant a giant war, and invaded by Russia. So, do we need a new framing for how we think about epidemic control in these types of environments, or a new framing more generally for how we think about global health? So in a world of fragility, in a world of displacement, in a world of conflict, how we think about global health or any other, quote unquote development topic, I think needs to be rethought. I think the other reason, in my opinion, to be questioning the status quo is, so we've been doing this now, and to this I mean, foreign assistance, global health. I have been in this sector for decades. And I think we can take a lot of pride in a lot of good work and good results. But I think it's also worth noting that we have a problem with sustainability, that oftentimes good results do not endure, that we achieve maybe great things, but those at times are rolled back. So we need to be thinking more about sustainability and the elements of sustainability rather than just, what are the immediate outcomes we're going to have. And that's hard, right? Because sustainability is a long-term process. Most of these projects are really short-term. So we do have a mismatch between our ambition and the type of funding, that exists. All right, so am I okay in time? It's like, I'm going to say a few other things, and then I'll get out of the way. So it is important to question the status quo. Now, when we think about, well, okay, so what do we need to keep in mind as we're implementing, a localization, a locally led development agenda? I'll note a few things. I think the first thing I would note is that a lot of times the focus in localization is about building capacity of local partners, that we have to build the capacity of local partners. What I'd like to propose to the audience is that what we don't often think about, what we need to think about more, is that we need to build our own capacity. That to make localization or locally led development work, we need to change ourselves. We need to realize that the processes, procedures, approaches, ways we think about partnering, even the way that, requests for proposals are issued in English, that these are all barriers to get to, getting the type of, inclusion of local knowledge, local voices that we need to see if localization or locally led development, if either of these two things are going to produce any of the expected results. So there's a lot of change that we need to do ourselves. The other thing, and I alluded to it earlier, is this question of local. Okay, so local partners. What's a local partner? AID has, and we work a lot with USAID, so I'm going to mention USAID. I think they've been doing a really good work in terms of advancing on the localization agenda. But then one issue is, well, how do you measure, progress towards that? And when you're measuring the metric, and there's a goal out there that USAID has put out, I think wisely so, because what gets measured gets done, said we want to see 25% of resources go to local partners. But then the question is, well, how are we defining local partners? And, and we have been engaged, and certainly I, as part of coalitions like Modernizing Foreign Assistance Network, have been engaged in conversations with USAID about whether their current definition of local is too broad. Because the current definition of local can include locally established partners. That can include organizations like FHI 360. It can include organizations like Deloitte or KPMG. Are those really local? I mean, by the strict sense of the word, they are. Is including those organizations in the metric going to get us to where we need to be in terms of the types of journey that we want? I don't know. I mean, it's worth discussing. And by the way, another aspect of local is, let's say that it went to not a locally established partner, but the assistance is going to a local partner. We tend to tick the box. Yes, we got local partners, but what local partners were established? Some months ago, Plan International did a really interesting study to look at flows of, where the money went to local organizations. They didn't do, this wasn't sort of universal, but they looked at a number of countries, I think. And what they found is that about 1% of the funding to local organizations was going to women-led and youth-led organizations. Isn't that interesting? So yes, the money has gone to local organizations, but I would argue that some of the most marginalized groups that already tend to be invisible, that are, by the way, the hardest hit by the polycrises that we're concerned about, those are not the organizations that are getting the resources. So clearly, we need to do more, and we really need to be intentional, and perhaps we need to do a better job in tracking not just local writ large, but what are the local organizations that are getting the funding. All right, so let me see if I have anything else. No, I think that's it. So I'm going to leave it at that. I hope that this has helped frame the conversation, and I turn it back to you.
Thanks, Tessie, and you can sit. Tessie here. I think, as I mentioned before, we will be less on that kind of philosophical and history analysis of decolonization, but rather we look at the practical strategies. And I think you raised some thought-provoking questions that will serve as a strong foundations for what, as we now transition into a panel discussion. So now I would like to invite our other three panelists to the stage, and I let our audience think and let these ideas sink in a little bit, and then we bring them back into the discussion. So first, I would like to introduce Dr. Sankitha Chandrasekaran, and I'm sorry if I can't pronounce the surname properly. I practiced from last night, but yeah. So Dr. Sangeeta has over 20 years of experience in climate change and energy governance and social policy. She was moderating a fantastic energy session this morning. And she has undertaken policy research for the European Union, the Center for New Energy Technologies, and the Climate Change Authority. Her work focuses on the distributive dimensions of energy transitions and the role of states. Dr. Sangeeta is currently working as a senior research fellow at University of Melbourne in Australia. Please welcome her to the stage. Our third panelist, Monsieur Cheikh Tidiane. He has more than 30 years, and yeah, he will surprise you later when he told me, like, yeah, I was born in this year. Like, what? He has more than 30 years of experience in high-level strategic management, innovation for change, and leadership in private sector, working for. And again, he surprised me that, you know, when I think about people working in our sector, I'm like, so you work for Palmolive and technology, telecommunication, and now he's serving as a senior advisor to the Minister of Health in Senegal. So, you know, bringing all this really interesting combination of experience, and same with you, Tessie, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Yeah, so, so please welcome Monsieur Tidiane. Our last panelist, whom you probably met in our youth-led session already, Zara Al-Hilali. She is the CEO of Oak Tree Australia, the nation's largest youth-led organizations, working to empower young leaders in Asia-Pacific regions. She's also a chairperson of the Western Australia Government Youth Council, representing 600,000 young people in policy making. She's published for Vogue, Gucci, and for being a visionary in peace and security. In 2023, she was named the Australian Women of Excellence recipient, so we're very lucky to have her in this panel as well. So thank you, the panelists. I appreciate your support and your knowledge, your wisdom, which will be invaluable for as we delve deeper into these topics. Now, we've heard from Tessie, although we didn't really talk all about decolonization, about strategies, but now I would like to hear from the other three panelists on what you think about the topic of decolonization, localizations, either from your personal experience or your work. Maybe give the audience, share with the audience 2 minutes of your thoughts. Sangeeta? And we just go like this. Oh, then it's not the right order. Sorry. Because we had the video. Yes, sorry. Can we go first with Monsieur Tidiane?
Thank you very much, Dr. Tuba, and thank you to the audience who give us the pleasure to come and listen to us. I would like firstly to congratulate Dr. Tessie for her speech. It in fact gave me some observation regarding mainly when you were talking about, the strategy that had to be used. And we all know that, strategy refer, to an organization, long-term goals. And if you have to build your long-term goals, and if you are talking about partnership, this is meaning that there should be a kind of collaborative plan if you want to be successful on the ground. She pointed out the point that if you look at earlier, organizations that are supporting countries were preparing everything and just in the country for implementation. But today, if you talk about decolonization, that means that we need more and more collaborative plan, and we need more and more to on board the local people, local community, local governors, civil society, all together in order to think out of the box and see what should be the interests for the country, aligning with the interests of the donors. I think this is some kind of, duo that may work properly. So this is what inspires me, what Tessie has told us earlier. So definitely we come back on other points.
Thanks, Didier. It's quite interesting when people ask me to, write the concept for this panel and moderate, because people look at me like, yeah, she's from Vietnam and the country has experienced a lot of wars and colonizations. In fact, 8 countries, and I can name them, but I won't. But when I was growing up, I learned a lot about in the history books, and all the time we were educated about colonization, we were invaded, we were this and that. But most of my tertiary education was in Western countries. And I have a very different view around that. And I think about how can we work together collectively. I'm more like forward-looking and just learning, but the learning should inform our future. Like you said, how can we work together at different levels? So I can totally see that. But Zara, I want to hear your story.
Thanks, Tuba. Before I begin, I also think it's quite fitting to acknowledge that today in my country, Australia, we acknowledge that this is a day of mourning for our Indigenous people. This is a day of ongoing colonisation for our country. So I pay my respects, particularly for my home country and the Indigenous elders in Australia, for their resistance and their survival during this hard time. I also pay my respects to any Indigenous people in this room today. I work at Oak Tree Australia, which is the largest youth-led organisation, and essentially we work across the Asia-Pacific region. And in particular, Tuba, at the inception of your speech, you had mentioned the notion of power shifting, and that's exactly what we do. Now, don't get me wrong, Australia has an incredible partnership alliance in restoring what it means to power shift, particularly through funding. But at Oak Tree, we essentially work with multiple different youth-led, unregistered organisations across the Asia-Pacific to shift that power back to them and to challenge different ways of creating sustainable development across a variety of different SDG goals from the grassroots level. So how we do this, Tuba, is through a few different elements, and I won't touch on all of them, but I think in particular I do want to touch on historical injustices, and in saying that I also want to touch on the cultural sensitivity of coming into another country. I mean, as we all know, historically, international aid, I mean, the term itself is quite tacky. It's quite bitter for many communities who go and try to restore what these historical injustices look like, but we try to challenge that status quo through our funding and philanthropic systems in place. We truly try to work as meaningfully as possible to not only empower communities to deliver their own projects through the funding that we provide, but we try not to also go into these communities, which has historically been a key component of international aid and development. We really prioritize local knowledge, and in particular, I mean, we're seeing with Pacific communities highlighting how important and integral Indigenous knowledge is when we go into and we fund some of these community projects. But we also value 2 key components of ownership and accountability. Ownership being that we recognize this is their project, and despite funding and despite aiding in campaign awareness and with the necessary capacity building and sharing mechanisms, we do believe that this is not our project to claim. And I think traditionally within many, I guess, institutions and international development and aid mechanisms, you do see a level of partnership which calls on for ownership as well of those providing philanthropic funding. Those are a few key components that I have called on from Tessie and yourself, Tuba, and I'm hoping to explore them as we dive through in the next few questions.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think we have Tessie representing an international NGO working in over 60 countries. And then we also have you representing a youth NGO. And so I in the discussion, I wanted to see if, there's any differences in the approach, or if there's any innovation or creativity that you could bring into the picture as well, and to build on your point on building our own capacity. I mean, this is precisely why we're here. We sharing our learning, and I want people to walk away from this with just one new thing that you thought you may apply, or you want to learn, or you want to share with us right now, then please do so as well. But let's move to Sangeeta.
Thanks very much for having me here today. Now, as a researcher and a teacher or a lecturer, if students were to ask me, what is decolonization? How do you define institutions? And what is good governance? That would be my worst nightmare, to have to define these terms. They're really difficult terms and they're hard to grasp. So my way of approaching this is to actually show you a research project that I collaborate with traditional owners in Australia, in which they're engaging in a process of decolonizing water governance. So we're just going to watch a video quickly, just a minute and a half, and then I'll make a few comments afterwards.
Pamuradel Giburini Gungana Yanan, Daligara Baram Baram Gungana Wanabi, Yawagiligim Panmara Delgi. Yenagawagim, we wanna Baranaga Giburini, Panmuradel Giburini Gungana Yanan, Daligara Baram Baram Gungana Wanabi, Yawagiligim Panmara Delgi. I'm singing, come close to the fire now, to the smoke. This is our medicine, good for us, make us feel good and healthy, and clean us, make us well. We want about Yagaji Burini, one Martelgi Burini, Gungarayanan. Talagara Baram Baram Gungana, wanna be Gawagilim, Panmara Delgi. Dalgi nyaga nyindi yiri pa martel ki nyaka nyura kili nyao ikima tangrata tari tari kuli nyura kili kema nyiti dalgi tangura karinata my country, my river, my place, good country.
So that is Brendan Kennedy, who's a Tadi Tadi Wadi Wadi elder, a traditional owner in the northern part of Victoria. Maybe we can go to the next slide. In Australia, and Victoria is a southern state. And he's talking about a river that flows through other states. So it flows from Queensland to New South Wales to Victoria and into South Australia. And this area is called the Murray-Darling Basin. And these are subnational states in a federal system of governance in Australia. And these states have control over water governance, or have since Australia was colonized. And whilst this is not geopolitical, the dynamics are not dissimilar. You have states who have very strong interests around resource governance, and they really don't like to cooperate. And as a result, as Brendan described, there's been tremendous environmental destruction. We might go to the next slide. One of the most alarming facts about this is that Indigenous people who have been custodians of this country for tens of thousands of years, as Brendan described, under the current water governance system, only have control of 0.2% of water entitlements in the Murray-Darling Basin. So this is a significant and enduring injustice, and this is the kind of, it is this status quo that they seek to challenge through what I'll go on to describe later, their strategies for decolonizing water governance. I won't say any more now, but I think it's a useful case study just to try and ground some of my thoughts around governance and decolonization.
Thanks, Sangeeta, and you will hear more on these case studies in this session. But maybe let's go back to Tessie. When I heard in another session as well that I think someone made this comment that we don't know how to do localizations, and clearly to date there's no commonly accepted definition of localization. I'm sure our colleagues from USAID or from Rockefeller Foundation or from even DFAT and others, we all have publications on localizations, but I think how to really operationalize it on the ground, and there are many good examples as well, but there clearly we need stronger evidence on the benefits and challenges of localizations. So in your experience at FHI 360, also beyond FHI, what some of the common challenges and nuances that organizations face in this process, and what, I mean, you mentioned some strategies that can be employed, but maybe give like a specific example of something that you think we could use to address some of these challenges.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to answer your question exactly, because I've been thinking about, what the other three panelists, have said. And so let me just say some things about localization before getting into the technical things. The thing about localization, and I don't know where you're going with your story, but it doesn't really, in my opinion, right, do much in terms of bringing local agency, right, and decision-making authority. Because like I said, you have a donor that's giving you the money and then telling you exactly what is it that needs to be implemented, and oftentimes how it's going to be implemented. And so, I think, like I said, localization in and of itself cannot be the journey, because localization by itself doesn't, in my opinion, get you to where you want to be. It also, it's worth noting, right, when a donor gives another entity sort of the funding and then, the scope of work and so on, it's worth noting that when the donor does that, the donor is shifting risk from itself to the other entity. Now, when the donor shifts risk to me, I'm a pretty big organization, I can deal with all kinds of things. When a donor shifts responsibility to a smaller entity, that can actually destroy that very entity that you're trying to build up and support and so on. One other thing, and I know it's like I sound like Debbie Downer because I started to talk about localization as a strategy and now I'm just seeing a lot of problems, but I just think it's worth coming into these things with your eyes wide open. I think the other thing that localization can do and has done, if that's the end point of the journey, is it can displace local priorities. And what do I mean by that? So I've been to countries where, so FHI 360, we do a lot of work for the US government. The US government, particularly in its PEPFAR program, has been very aggressively moving money from INGOs to local partners. And we do that, I think we do that well, and we do that happily because, like I said, it's a good start to the broader shifting of power agenda. However, in talking to local partners that are now doing the work that we used to do, part of what they're saying is, well, this is a lot of work. I don't have any time to be thinking about my agenda because I'm very, very busy implementing this donor's agenda. So I think that one of the things that can happen in localization is you begin to displace local agendas, local priorities, because the whole focus becomes the donor's, that particular donor's agenda. Again, it doesn't need to be that way. We can, but it calls for, again, going into these things with your eyes wide open, and it calls for intentionality. And let's again realize that what we have here is not necessarily a shifting of power, but a shifting of risk to entities that perhaps are not well equipped because, to be able to deal with the risks that are being shifted to them. So these are, I guess, double-edged swords. I don't know, is that what you had in mind when you asked the question?
I mean, yes.
Okay.
And again, I mean, we start challenges first, and we talk about, success later. So
Okay.
it's like the end of the tunnel. But just the second part of the question, do you have like an example of some strategies that you think, like you mentioned 2 strategies before, but maybe some specific measure or example that we can employ to address some of these issues? I mean, it could be beyond the risk shifting. How can we work with, and I'm very mindful when I use local term here, because it could mean many things, as you said, displace priorities at that level. Like an example of something that in your experience that you've encountered that you can share with the audience.
Well, or I would love for the audience to share with us. I mean, I think, sort of first and foremost, let's make sure that that the local organizations that are being asked to implement, these agendas, if we're just talking about localization, that they have the resources that they need to do what they're being asked to do. In the case of USAID, and like I said, I'm really just talking about that because that's the donor I know best. I know we have somebody from AID who is way more knowledgeable than me about these things, but anyway, it is about making sure, for example, that they are able to recover the costs related to setting up the infrastructure to deliver these programs. And not to bore this audience with a lot of minutia from this particular donor, but if you're a local partner and you're a relatively new partner to this particular donor, you don't get the same cost recovery that I get because I have an established negotiated indirect cost recovery agreement with AID. But a local partner has a de minimis, which is maybe 10%, and 10% might not be enough, right, to really support them. So again, in the same process of trying to shift, more decision-making responsibility funding to local partners, if we don't adequately resource them, then we're not really helping to advance their local priorities and helping them to advance as important local actors that have important viewpoints that that this donor quite rightly wants to make sure are advanced.
Thanks, Jessie, Tessie. I think if in the audience you have something to add, please hold on to that, because I'm going to go to Monsieur Di Tidiane and then I come back to you. But just to add to that, Tessie, when we talk about resources, like I tend to think about beyond financial resources as well. I think about building assets at local level. So financial resources is a financial asset, but then also we have the social assets, the human assets and the different groups of assets that you can mobilize to address some of the risk or build the resilience within the communities we work with to respond to some of these risk-shifting issues. But you mentioned, so I'm very mindful of when I use locals here, and I'm glad that we have Monsieur Tidiane here representing the national government of Senegal, but we also have Zara, working with a very grassroots level, and I have Zara to comment on this shortly. But be ready. I'm going to be very provocative now. So I read an article that was published just this month. I mean, this is a situation that Senegal and Tidiane can talk more about that. But the country has long sought solutions to achieve universal health coverage. However, in the context dependent on international aid, the country faces multiple external pressures to choose policy instruments. And the title of the article, and you can look after I can send you the article. It's external influences over Senegalese health financing policy, delaying universal health coverage. And the author even went as far as saying it could be another global health nonsense case study. So what it says is that, and this is empirical data from 20 years of reforms in Senegal with interviews of extensive group of people in government and NGOs. Basically, the findings said that the community-based health insurance was not an appropriate solution for UHC. However, some international actors have influenced their continued application. An externally proposed alternative proved to be counteracted and delayed and could delay the reform by 10 years. Now, I thought that was a very big claim, and I mean, I trust the data and all that. It was published in a big paper, but I wanted to ask you, well, first of all, what you think about that, and second of all, your Minister of Finance said that during COVID-19, the country realized the importance of investing in strong health systems and locally led reforms. It's clear your president also committed to that. So two things, your thought on the article and also maybe a bit of updates to us on where things are in Senegal with locally led reforms.
Thank you, Tuba. I mean, this article is very interesting. I went through, and it appealed, I mean, of course, I mean, some question about what they have found on the ground. As they said, I mean, it was 20 years back that they studied all this. And this is just telling something regarding the way, I mean, localization, if you, for example, talk about localization, is being applied in a country. And if you look at the main challenges, because these donors that are, I mean, involved in the country for assisting the country, sustaining the health system, building the health system, etc., etc. So there are a few challenges, of course, they are facing when they enter in a country, mainly in Senegal. And I've identified three main challenges when we talk about localization, for example. The first one is regarding the communication. There might be language barrier. There might be also common understanding or what they want to do in the country. Because do not forget that Senegal, for example, is a French-speaking country. But much of our donors, 70% or plus, are in course English-speaking country. So, by the way, excuse my broken language. So, all of this is just leading to say that, I mean, if the communication is not clear enough, if there is not a common understanding, this can lead you to some mistakes. This is one. The second one, the second challenge is what I will call, I mean, cultural nuance. The culture is very important in the country. I will just take an example. Today, if, for example, you would like to promote sexual reproduction, Senegal is a Muslim country. It's not a Muslim country. It's 95% Muslim. So there are some aspects on the cultural and religious aspect that you cannot ignore. Mainly when you go to the remote area that are not facing on a daily basis internet, communication, worldwide things. And you would like, for example, to say that, okay, I would like to promote the condoms. For sure, there will be restriction in accepting that because this is not on their culture. So reason why the interaction with the community is something which is very important. And last but not least, I will talk about what I will call translation errors. Because if you have your strategy, an action plan, your strategy, sorry, should be turned into action plan, but it should be translated the way you understand it and the way the, receiving country also understanding. So if there is translation barrier or error, of course, it will be very hectic. So I will just jump in now in my presentation as a translation for the second question you are asking. Senegal moved to a certain number of reforms. Our country was get independence in 1960. I'm talking about decolonization, so let's just take the political aspect. 1960, April 1960 was our independence. I was not yet born. I was born in August 1960. So the picture that you are seeing here was like 5 years ago before I joined the Ministry of Health. I was having very nice black hair. Now you can see gray hair. So does it mean that within the 5 years that I spent in the ministry, there is a lot of job, a lot of headache, etc., etc.? Maybe yes, maybe not. But it's just a way to say that, the reforms that are ongoing, most of them were built on practices that were before independence with the colonialism. And I will run through. So if you can just move on the slide. So today the understanding on the reform is that in terms of, when we talk about, for example, health, our president, Macky Sall, that you can see on the picture, was saying that his aim is to enable Senegalese people, when they need it, to have access to quality health care without any financial risk or barrier. So this financial risk is something that is very important in the sense of if you want to build equity in the system and in the country, people should have equal access. But the particularity in Senegal is that everything is quite polarized in the capital city, which is Dakar. 80% of the doctor, 80% of the infrastructure, 80% of everything. So in these past 10 years, the reform, for example, was moving into accelerating the process in order to build equity nationwide. So in the background, you will see that this president have a vision. Because on the national plan, we have what we call the Senegalese National Plan, and we are currently also working with another department, ministerial, which is using and working on the universal health coverage. But the reforms that I would like to discuss today will be 4, but I will focus only maybe in 1 or 2 reforms. We are making reform on the pharmacy, on the digitization. We are reforming the hospital governance and the private health sector, and we are also reforming the legal entities. So if you come to the pharmacy, for example, the reform of the local pharmacy industry is aiming really to encourage local production, pharmacy. Because today in the country, 85% or more of our medicine are being imported. So you can just imagine the cost that they'll be in there. And mainly when we were facing the COVID-19 crisis, this is where we really, understand and see how it was difficult to get access to those medicines, to get access to the vaccine and so on. So this reform conduct the country to go 3 main activities. The first one is the creation of a delivery unit. So this delivery unit has the aim to relaunch the local pharmacy industry. And his main role will be to serve as a kind of governance body for the whole pharmaceutical sector. Because before that, all the department or division related to pharmacy was linked to the Ministry of Health, was under the umbrella of the Ministry of Health. But now this delivery unit have been created and is under the umbrella of the head of state, which means that he has some kind of autonomy to observe and see what is going on the health sector. There is another reform that has been done is the creation of the National Regulation Board, Agence Nationale de Régulation Pharmaceutique. This was coming from 2 main entities. The first one was the National Drug Control Laboratory, And the second one was the direction of pharmacy and medicines. So we merged these two into one entity in order to be more proactive, speeding the process. Because, for example, before this was implemented, like if you want to ask authorization for importing medicines or doing some kind of thing, it was taking, weeks and weeks, sometimes up to 1 month. But now, with the new agency, within the 48 hours, everything is sorted. So it accelerated really the process. And there was also the establishment of the National Supply Pharmacy. It was also a body that was linked to the Minister of Health. Now he have been erected, and it was completely separated from the Minister of Health. So he has this autonomy with legal entity, and all of this today is helping the pharmaceutical body to really, make some good steps. This reform, imagine, was adopted in 2023. But the first reform in the pharmacy was before I was born, in 1954. Almost 70 years to come for the first reform in the pharmacy. So we should learn from something here. Other point that I would like to talk about the reform is the creation of the legal affairs or legal department. This one is aiming to support the department, the ministry, the other services, and to help to decentralize, because Senegal is composed with 14 regions. And up to now, everything was centralized at the ministry level. So today we are working hard in order to have some kind of ability in the different regions for them also to be more proactive and participate in the effort of the health system. So this creation of the legal affairs will be helping out to speed up the process with all what is related to rule and regulation in order to help out the country to be successful. So I just don't want to go further than that, but I just want to come on the decolonization side, because this reform really will be helping out the country to be more successful compared to what we were facing earlier. But I just want to borrow one thing that have been learned from former President Nelson Mandela from South Africa. He was saying that to be free is not just throw off your shell. It is to live in a way that respect and strengthen the freedom of others. Meaning that we are heading to decolonization. We would like to have more localization, meaning that we have to respect each other's opinion, but please, let's work together. Let's work as a team, because only as a team we can achieve more. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. And I have a question, but I'm not going to do that because I feel very greedy. So I will maybe open this question to the audience. If the audience can have one question, either to Tessie or Tidian or any other panelists, then this is your chance to raise this one question. Yes, please. Sorry, in the middle, if you could.
Okay, tēnā koutou katoa. I also like to pay my respects to the Aboriginal people. I currently work on Wurundjeri land, but I'm a New Zealander and I'm an Indigenous to New Zealand. So I work for Vic Health and we're a health promotion foundation. But I just had a question for Zahara. I really enjoyed and resonated to what you were talking about there in terms of being youth-led and being community-led, locally-led. And I'm just interested, because we have a youth-led initiative for young Aboriginal people called Strong Young Mob, and it's about Aboriginals talking about what matters to them, and they're coming up with what the initiatives or the projects that are important to them, and then the funding flows from there. But the step that we took, and I'm interested to see if you're doing the same, is how they apply is also being designed by them. So, for example, they might want to do a video versus your usual documents where you fill out, you've got to do the tenders, etc. So I'm just interested in the methods that you use for youth when they're applying for projects. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your question. It's very interesting. I must firstly admit that Oak Tree, my organisation, used to have very deep colonial practices. So we used to actually go into countries like Africa and build schools, which was traditionally what international aid and development looked like in Australia, as I'm sure you're aware of. The way that we're approaching things right now is exactly the same. We're truly trying to listen to young people because we recognise, just as my colleagues also spoke about, that language, cultural sensitivities are big issues that are deep-rooted within the international development sector. So instead of having long-winded budget proposals, for example, I think budget proposals in particular for some of our partners are very foreign concepts that are not regularly applied because money and finances is handled completely differently within different cultural contexts as well. So we try to create a process that is as easy but also as I guess friendly to them. And for example, we recently had a partner in Indonesia who came on board, but we had realised upon their application, which was translated in Google Translate, that they had struggled with our online Zoom calls. So as a result of this, we hired a translator. And I think that there are different ways that you can really work with young people to, in particular, recognise how you can evolve throughout the process as well. And I think that's something that we don't really talk about within the international development space as well. Projects really do need to evolve with the needs of different communities that you work with. And unfortunately, it has been a learning process for our organisation as well. We've gotten things completely wrong. We've provided not enough resources to different organisations. We've really minimised young people's time as well, but we're truly trying to, I guess, power shift, just as you mentioned, Tuba, at the inception, that it's all about listening, it's all about learning within the process. And I think sometimes with international development, and especially, and I'll talk about this later, when you have monitoring, evaluation and learning processes, like for example with the Australian government, and you're accountable to different frameworks of funding, sometimes we get worried about making errors as well with funding in particular. So I guess navigating that different dynamic of not only being accountable to our donors, but also being as decolonial as possible with our partners has been something that we're truly challenging right now as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and thanks our audience. Can you hold on to that? And I come back because we still have two other people, and as I promised, there will be plenty of time for us to chat. But because both of you mentioned the cultural nuances, and I think that would be a perfect segue to Sangeetha to continue our case study on Murray-Darling Basin.
Yeah, so let's travel back to Tari Tari country in Australia, and maybe we can just play once again just a minute of the video.
Plains. Cultural flows, it comes from the Chuka Declaration, but it really comes from the spirit and heart of our nations and our country and our waterways. And for us, cultural flows is water, cultural water, spiritual water. It's water for our people, it's water for our country, but it's also water for water. Because the water needs its cultural flow itself. That water needs to flow across country.
Cultural flows is a concept that traditional owners have been developing for a number of years, especially in the southern Murray-Darling Basin, as essentially a tool to identify means of establishing far greater Aboriginal control and authority over water management, especially along the Murray River floodplain here, such as sites like this at Margeria Lagoon.
Thanks. So that was Bruce Lindsay, who is the lead lawyer for Environmental Justice Australia, talking to my my colleague Brendan Kennedy. So they talked about cultural. Sorry, let me try and go back. Cultural flows. So historically, under the colonial water model, the main focus of regulating the river was to achieve commercial water, mainly for agriculture, but also water for consumption, particularly for townships. Australia is the driest inhabited continent in the world, so water is an extremely valuable currency, and it enables a whole lot of development opportunities. So historically, commercial and household water has been the main focus of governance. Since the 1990s, there's been a wake-up call and a much greater recognition of environmental degradation of the river and the basin. And so environmental water has emerged as a very important category. And there's an entire governance complex that relates to environmental water. So what Brendan and other Indigenous leaders have raised is that what's missing in all of this is the notion of cultural water. Part of the colonizing regime around water is to erase the prior ownership and custodianship of water by First Nations. And so they've developed this idea of cultural flows, which is creating water, allowing water to flow for First Nations cultural purposes. But the diagram on the screen indicates that it also serves other purposes. It helps to make country healthy. It also helps to make people healthy, particularly First Nations people, and it also helps to strengthen their cultural economy. And so the notion of cultural water is actually much broader and brings together the three other frameworks or paradigms that have been used to define water governance to date. It's very important, I would add, that respecting diverse knowledges about water is at the heart of this. The colonial water governance arrangements have been very good at defining what the problem of water is and measuring it using their metrics, hydrographs, water flows, etc. So one of the really significant moves that traditional owners are making is to say, well, we want to define what water means to us. We want to apply our traditional ecological knowledge, and we want to embed water within a larger cultural landscape. So this artwork that was done by Brendan is his attempt to represent the significance of that lagoon that you saw in the video. And it's not just about the water that flows. It is about the water, it's about the plants, the kumbungi plant that they use for healing. It's about the scar trees, the cultural trees where women give birth that have very significant cultural heritage value to them. And in fact, it's the whole cultural landscape that needs to be integrated into any water governance arrangements in order to truly decolonize the process.
Thanks. I like this view on respecting diverse knowledge, and I think the whole conversation around localization, there's another parallel session right now on knowledge, and the question is, and I'm asking this to a lot of our global health communities, is whose knowledge that counts? Because I think for people working in natural resource management and climate change, it's been a long debate for a long time that whose knowledge, what kind of knowledge, citizen knowledge, does that count? And for global health communities, I mean, I have that question to you, but I'm not seeking answers right now, but it's a pertinent question. And now I turn to Sarah, if you have any final comments on the challenges before we move on to the next question.
Thanks, Tuba. I'll be very brief because I think my colleagues have really covered it. But I think a big one that we've had is language barriers as well, and trust and communication. A good example is I was recently in Indonesia working on a cross-cultural project of sexual health and reproductive rights. And my Indonesian colleagues, and mind you, I'm a Muslim woman, so I thought I could easily navigate the cultural nuances, but my Indonesian colleagues were talking about a concept of MBA, and I was sitting there thinking, what does a Masters of Business Administration have to do with anything for 30 minutes? And I realized that they were talking about a concept called marriage by accident, which is what they call sexual intercourse before marriage, and you get married to protect your family, to protect yourself. And I think these are some things that we really forget, particularly for, I guess, Western, global North countries who do fund projects in the global south. We forget that we need to equip ourselves with cultural sensitivity. And I think sometimes we also really forget that we need to invest in knowledge of locals as well. And irrespective of my identity of being a Muslim woman, I almost forgot, and I almost forgot to really recognize that culture is so nuanced within a variety of different settings. So that was a big realization that I had internally. I think the second one is also the power dynamics that we've already spoken about. I think especially when you are working with, and as a young person myself who works with local youth-led unregistered organizations, it is quite difficult to navigate being in this space where you are almost a senior to some of the organizations that you work to. There are very high levels of respect and regard that they consistently uphold. And I think that is perpetuating colonization, because we are not here to impose our power and our knowledge. We're here to support you in your own projects that you envisage, just like you spoke about, Tessie. It's not us providing project ideas, it's them creating them and building them. So that's also been a challenge that we've struggled with at Oak Tree as well, just ensuring that we consistently remind ourselves, but also our local partners, that we are not superior to them at all, and they have all the knowledge that is needed to build strong projects. And I think finally what I spoke about before about maintaining due diligence standards has been a very big difficult one, especially when you're funding unregistered youth-led organisations, which is unfortunately not common practice within the international development space in Australia. In particular, being accountable to our donors and ensuring that sometimes when our partners don't have the knowledge or the skills, and they do need, for example, more time on different projects or less money than what they had initially asked us for, it has been really challenging for us to be able to navigate meeting both sides of expectation whilst maintaining our due diligence as an organisation.
Yeah, thanks, Dara. And I think that goes back to Tessie's point before, building our own capacity. And if you can also, as an audience, I urge you to think at individual level, what are we going to do in this decolonization process or localization process at our individual level? Tessie, do you have some point to add, or?
Well, I mean, I guess the only other thing I will say, because it's a little bit of a, maybe a subtext here, is this question of risk. So I talked first about risk shifting, but also it's about, organizations like ours, and it's interesting to listen to all of the speakers. If we really want to meaningfully change and shift power, we need to be willing to take different risks, maybe even more risks than what we have been taking traditionally. And that can be, certainly it can be challenging for organizations like mine. Mostly taking, U.S. and other government resources. So these are taxpayer resources. I want to be a good steward of that. But in order to achieve objectives and really begin to change the way that we do things, have that ability to even work in different languages, the issue of culture and bringing in that knowledge, all of that takes more time. It takes big, profound changes in how we do things. We need to be able to take more risks, and the question for all of us is, are we willing, and at times, are we able to do that? I would hope that the answer is yes. But the reality is that sometimes the answer is no. If I may, to go back to USAID, I had a conversation with, I remember with Sarah Rose, who's leading a lot of these initiatives within AID on localization and locally led development. She talked about the fact that AID, actually like ourselves, they have a new risk appetite statement. They're saying, we're willing to take more program risk. But that same appetite statement says that they're not willing to take more financial risk. Because it is politically difficult. Well, I don't know how you take program risk without taking financial risk. The two things are kind of related. But I also understand that politically, it's very, because, so there are politics all over the place in all of these conversations, right? And we haven't really talked about politics. But there are the politics within the country, within the donor community, and more broadly. And politics sometimes, affect what risks we're willing to take, and how we, and what we even say about the different ways that we're willing to work.
Thanks, and I think on that, I will now turn to our audience, and we will have a bit more interactive mode from now. We talk about risk, we talk about challenges. So now let's talk about success. I always think when I teach, I also ask my students to think about your blue sky ideas, what success looks like for you. And obviously for us as, organizations or practitioners, you actually have to articulate it through our indicators, metrics. How can you measure your success? You can't just visualize it, but you can actually have to be able to measure it, even with risk. What are your risk mitigation measures? How can you make sure that you can navigate that risk landscape? So can we have and I will have these questions for our panelists, and each one of you, if you can give me 2 to 3 indicators that you think can measure the success for your work, as well as the audience. We'd have the Mentimeter survey up on the screen right now. If you can get your cell phone out and respond to this question. I just tested it, but it doesn't count that leadership. That's just an example. But while you are doing your Mentimeter survey, I'm asking our panelists also to give us their thoughts and ideas on indicators and metrics. Maybe I can start with Sangeeta.
Sure. So just coming back to this case study that I've been talking about. Oh, sorry. Got the mic. Just coming back to the case study. So Tadi Tadi have been spent a lot of time trying to develop cultural indicators. So they are really trying to establish the link between healthy water and healthy people, healthy country and healthy people. And to do this, they started to really get frustrated that the water authorities had their own indicators of what success looked like, and they wanted to speak back to them and say, this is what success looks like for us. So you can see these indicators on the screen. And a successful reallocation of water, for example, needs to ensure that emotional and spiritual well-being is upheld. Now, this is important because they've had examples of test flows where they'll get a big pipe and they'll pump a lot of water into a particular area around the lagoon, and they often don't tell the traditional owners this is going to happen well in advance. So it's a very kind of instrumental movement of water, but they've actually conducted well-being surveys both before and after, and they found that approach to delivering water actually diminishes their sense of well-being because they had no agency over it, no control. And it wasn't going to the places that were meaningful to them. So that's an example of how one indicator can be applied. The other is that there's a lot of discussion around water ownership and giving water back. But they've really made the link between water ownership and self-determination. So they want to have a say, and they want to hear their voices in the decisions made about the water that they get, the amount of water they get, the seasonal watering goes on, when they're going to get it. So once again, self-determination and the exercise of sovereignty is very important to them. And just one more example of an indicator is connection to place. So being engaged in the places that are meaningful to them and participating in the water delivery is absolutely key to them. Now, they've also thought about how these metrics apply in different temporal and spatial scales, from the local to the regional, as well as to the state and to the national. Now, the important point here is that they always embed the local in multi-scalar governance, because it's not enough for them just to receive water at Maguia Lagoon if that water is already degraded as it moves from upstream to downstream, if other traditional owners upstream have not been given the same opportunities, and also if the overall governance regime hasn't respected the sovereignty and dignity of Indigenous people. So it's very much about thinking about how the local is embedded in the different scales of governance of this mighty river that stretches across 4 states. Finally, they've spoken to the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, which is this trans-state, so it crosses all the states to govern the Murray-Darling River Basin. And they've said, so you're telling us that these are your priorities for First Nations, water ownership, participation. We want to tell you what that means in terms of our indicators. So they've explained here that water ownership relates to their metrics of self-determination and cultural economy, that working on country connects to their ideas of connection to place, responsibility to country and to ancestors, and cultural experiences. And I point this out because whilst it's really important to develop local metrics and indicators, it's really important that there's a conversation between the local and the regional and the national, and potentially also the international, depending on the context, in order for real change to happen over time. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Ankita. Can I just have the Mentimeter back on the screen for now? Oh, okay, we have lots of ideas here already, but I still remember that you have a question, but we'll go back to your question after we do the indicators. Okay, we will come back to this, but maybe 3 top indicators you have in mind for Zara, Zhijiang, and Tessie before we move to reviewing these indicators from the audience. What do you have in mind?
I'm seeing a lot of similar notions that I have written down, to be honest. A good example that we've had is community participation and having more of local communities being involved. I mean, recently we had a project in Laos which started the first ever app for young people to access mental health in the country, and we've seen multiple different, hundreds of young people want to participate in this project, but also utilize different new technology software to aid in producing this app. So a big indicator for us has been engaging more communities beyond our local partner and establishing wider networks for our local partner on the grassroots. Local ownership as well, owning this project and also taking a step back has been a big one. I think you spoke about it really well, so I won't go too deep into that. And I think a question that I consistently also ask myself is, are we rectifying some of the colonial damage within specific regions that we are aiding with their project? So this is always a question that I think it really changes on different environments that you go into, or different countries or communities that you go into. But I think it's always about ensuring that we don't perpetuate colonization within these countries. And I think some of the issues that we spoke about previously are good examples of some of the challenges that perpetuate colonization.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really interesting, because I never thought about that, the need and the ability to anticipate some of these existing injustice and rectify them. I mean, obviously that's a clear need, but then I'm thinking, what kind of specific indicators can we have for that? And I was thinking more about like engagement and participation. But yeah, thanks for that. Monsieur Tidjon?
Oh, thank you. I mean, some of metrics and indicators that came on top of my mind, mainly we are talking in the public sector. The first one I've write it down, because when you talk public health, you are seeking for the patient, you are seeking for the community. So the first one I've done is the local implication of the community and their happiness with what is going on the ground. The second one is also the ownership. There is another metric I've put down, it's the accountability, and last but not least, capacity building, because I do believe that we need to train, develop people, and give them more and more, I mean, sense of doing well what they are supposed to do. Thank you.
Thanks. I see local ownership as kind of a bigger indicator in the middle, but I really challenge us, because for me, local ownership is also a loaded term. And like, break that down to me if you can in the audience. But Tessie.
Well, actually, so local ownership, because I agree that's really important, and I was trying to think of what might be different measures of that. One clear measure is, so because we talk about sort of external funding that's coming to local organizations, but looking at how that is changing over time, and in particular, the proportion of external donor funding versus the proportion of government funding and funding from from other local sources. I mean, that's an expression of, I think that this activity, these goals are important enough to continue to fund. So looking at sort of the trajectory, right, of what is happening to donor funding for, external donor funding for specific activities. I think so, and that's kind of like a longer, that's a longer term process. And that's, I go back to the theme. There are things that we can measure short term that maybe have to do with local processes. So things like joint planning, joint budgeting, joint, even, joint monitoring, evaluation, joint design, right? Are we building structures that support that and enable that and promote that? So that's on the shorter term side. And then on the longer term side, yeah, these questions of, what's happening to the funding.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I just felt like there's so many things we can just discuss about this, but I would like to now turn to the audience, and thanks for your contribution here. I think some of it is specific, but some, like, I would like maybe one of our audience, Shamika, can I invite you?
Can I just one note as I'm looking at the things? I think it's just important because we're talking about sort of processes and so on. It comes out in your slides, Sangeeta. I mean, ultimately, somebody or somebody's put, improvement in health outcomes or health improvement. Yeah, I mean, that's why we're doing all of this, right? So it's important to keep our eye on the ball. Are we seeing real improvements? You talked about, are you happy with what's going on? I mean, that cannot be discounted. We can have all these other indicators. Ultimately, are there improvements, right?
Yeah. So I read a fair bit about localization published by USAID, and we're lucky to have Shamika in the room. I would like you to share with us your thoughts on our audience list of indicators, as well as share with us the latest updates on the indicators that USAID has for localization.
Thank you, Tuba. Hello, everyone. My name is Shamika Harmon. I'm with the U.S. Agency for International Development, based in Washington, D.C., in our Bureau for Global Health. I want to thank the panel for everything that they've said. A lot of the things that you all have said at least warms my heart because it also lets us know that one, we recognize the power and privilege that we have as a U.S. agency, also as a funder, but that we are actively trying to work to make some changes internally. Under our current administrator, Samantha Powers, she has challenged us to think of ourselves as not just the U.S. Agency for International Development, but the U.S. Agency for Inclusive Development. And what that means is she made an announcement in her speech in 2021 that the U.S. Agency for USAID is going to be aiming for 25% of our funding to move to local partners by 2030, as well as 50% of our involvement to include local voices and local actors and local communities also by 2030. And so in March of 2023, we just released our new policy framework for the agency. And in that, our mantra is progress beyond programs, because while we do need to measure the work that we do, especially I'm in the Global Health Bureau, but USAID also covers education, democracy and governance, economic growth, foreign disasters and humanitarian assistance. So we cover a wide breadth of technical areas. We also recognize the importance of the people and the countries and the communities in which we work, and it's not just enough to be focused on our programs. And so that's what we really mean about progress beyond programs. And so how we're measuring whether or not we achieve that 25% local partner investment and 50% local voices increase is we've come up with our internal metrics that's really shaped around 4 categories. And that first category is working directly with local partners. And a good practice for that is just exactly what that says, is working more directly with local partners. I will concede that we do need to do a better job at how we're defining local partners, but again, you know, change doesn't happen overnight, and so over time we will be better with how we define those things. Our second category is creating effective local partnerships. Under this, good practices includes co-creating with our local and regional partners, making descriptive and not prescriptive awards. So we're trying to make our awards such that we're putting out a description and not providing a laundry list of what we want to see in our awards. And then we're also working towards helping local and regional partners achieve that full cost recovery. So what Tessie mentioned earlier, that a lot of our international or US-based organizations have some financial coverage that local organizations haven't had the pleasure of enjoying. And so we're working with our Office of we call it the Office of Acquisitions and Assistance, but what that translates to in layman's terms is our contracting office. So these are the people who actually write up our awards. Like, they're working so that we can fund local organizations so they too can have financial protection and security when being a USAID partner. Our third category is recognizing, leveraging, and strengthening local capacity. And under this, good practices can include advancing local and regional entities' readiness to work with USAID, measuring programmatic success using locally defined measures and not our defined measures, and then conducting evaluations using local experts. And then our fourth and final category that we're using to measure our localization and inclusive development work is engaging communities directly. And this really speaks to the inclusive development side about conducting listening section tours to inform our activity designs, co-creating our programs with actual local communities, and institutionalizing feedback mechanisms and accountability where we hear back from our local partners on the performance of our programs, and including those from within the communities that we're serving, and then implementing participatory monitoring and evaluation and learning. And the way in which we're setting up this indicator, for those who are statisticians or epidemiologists, because we always have to have our metrics, is that our numerator is the percentage of our programs that have to meet 2 of the good practices across 2 of the categories over all of our and the denominator is all of our programs. And so that's how we'll get to our 25 and our 50% goal by 2030.
Thanks, Shamika. That's very encouraging, thinking about a list of internal indicators. And I mean, the list of indicators we had on the screen before, when I think about, designing a project, so you need to include these indicators, and then it will be evaluated against these indicators. And you mentioned that some of these indicators will be co-designed and locally measured and discussed. So let's keep us posted on your USAID progress, and there are lots of material on best practices that we look forward to learning from. Now, we have, I think, about 20 minutes or so left. I would like to open the floor for questions to our panelists and also to Shamika on indicators if you have any question to ask. I think you had one before. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Paul Lalvani. I'm from Empower School of Health, an academic training institute based out of New Delhi. 4 data points and then a question. The Global Fund, I used to work for the Global Fund about 20 years ago. The Global Fund's mandate was country-led development. India, as an example, for the last 15 years, about $1 billion have been given to different, probably more than that, to different entities. All of them were international, all of them, in terms of the principal recipients who received the funding, who implemented the grants. This year, the government mandated and deleted all those organizations and insisted that Indian entities would receive the funding. Top-down directive by the government as opposed to donor-led intention, which was always there, that should be country-led. Data point number 2, and this is in response to USAID and other donors talking about localization. All the big boys, all the Beltway bandits as they're referred to, have all opened shop in India. Some under their original names and some under new names. PATH has their own, JSI has their own, FHI is FHI, and there are a few more as well. So all of a sudden, the indigenous entities have to now compete even more so with the local ones. Before we were competing with them internationally, which was already difficult. Data point 3, we managed to become a sub-recipient to a USAID grant in India after many years. But because, and Tessie, you referred to this earlier, which was very helpful, because we didn't know all the mechanics and the fundings and the overheads and everything else, we probably lost money in it. It was a learning experience, but we managed to become a sub-recipient. So that was a win. It took us 2 years to get the grant. That cost wasn't even included, and then we ended up losing, and we ended prematurely because we couldn't sustain it. So the win was actually a loss. And data point 4, right now we are contracted by FHI as a vendor to support them on an activity. And that's been a positive relationship, okay? It's not a partnership, it's a vendor, but it's the beginning of a relationship. All of that to say, and the question is, how can we move from ad hoc and sporadic intentions and goodwill to something that's more strategic and intentional, that can yield the desired results, which we're looking for. And if we fine-tune the mechanics of it, we should be able to get to the end point, which is desirable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, you have a second question. Maybe we just take 2 questions and then we will give a response. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Noda, working for JICA, Japanese International Corporation. Then actually I'm working in Senegal. Then he's my colleague. And so actually regarding the localization and pharmaceutical industry area, localization of this area is very important because if this area is weak, the partner have to procure the medicine by themselves. So if the local capacity of the procuring the medicine is well, I think that this is a good for localizing the procurement. So I really appreciate it. But the one question is another localization is not localization is budget procedure. For example, in Japan, JICA is doing the general budget support. This is non-earmarked budget support. So this is Senegal government has a grip. They can use whatever you want. So this is a good movement toward to the decolonization. But on the other hand, the operational level, for example, the chief of the division, some division, when I talked, now you have the money because Japan put the money in the government. So please use this money, asking the Minister of Finance. But they said that, yes, but the process of getting the money is very long, it's complicated. So that it's easy to get the money from the partner side. It's more fast. So this is what I heard. So, which means that even we put the money in the national budget as a general budget support, but in the operational level, people is not welcome. So I think that to make it more practical, so what do you think this problem?
Thank you. I think Tidiane and I had that exact conversation over lunch. But maybe let me turn to the first question, and I may invite Tessie to respond to the first question, and also any other panelists and the audience if you have response. And thanks for the 4 data points. They are very valid assessment, and the situation in India is a particular one. And Tessie, would you like to have a go first?
Yeah, so thanks for your comments. I thought they were great, and I'm sure my colleagues here also have responses. And that move that the government of India made to sort of mandate, okay, now it's going to go to local entities, maybe sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen, because otherwise, like I said, sometimes because there are risks to changing the way that things are normally done, sometimes one way of doing it is just to mandate. It's like you've been standing by the pool long enough to see it, to wait and see if the water will get warmer, just jump right in. But a couple of comments. One is on this question of international entities establishing local presence. Well, that's part of the comment I had at the beginning, right? What is considered local? I will tell you that my approach at FHI 360, because there was a sense. There's been discussions within the organization before I came into FHI 360 about whether, because of localization, we should be establishing, local entities, local FHI 360s. My own, and what I said, and what I'm telling you now is, I think that's silly. That's not really, because we're not local, and so pretending that we are is not particularly helpful. We have to always register locally. We're following local laws, but to have, to pretend that some of these entities are local, and I don't want to be competing with local players. I don't think that's my point. My value is not in competing to displace local players from doing the work that they can very capably do. So I completely agree with you, and I don't think it should be happening. On this question of, can we have relationships with partners that are more strategic and less transactional? I'd very much welcome it, and my colleagues from FHI 360 that are here know that we've been discussing that. We've been, we recognize that a lot of the relationships that we have with local partners are very transactional. Now, that's a function of procurement processes that demand, that have demanded traditionally that we, we wait for the request for proposal, request, for assistance. We look at the thing, and then we go out and we identify who we need for that. That's, because when the RFA comes out, there's 30 to 45 days to respond. So the process itself pushes you to be transactional. The question is, what can we do to change our own processes and approaches to, to design, implementation, even gathering market intelligence? Can we be doing that different? And and my sense is, yes, we can and we should be doing it differently. Because I think that there are real advantages to having, for both sides, to be having long-term, more strategic and less transactional partnerships. But just to note that there's a lot of pressure in the processes to be transactional. I know that's not perfect, but that's kind of, I don't know if...
Thanks, Stacy. Is there anyone else who want to add to the response? You have a question, or you want to add to the response? So maybe just wait, because we still have a second question that has been responded, and I turn to Tidian for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Noda, for your very tricky question. I mean, tricky in the sense that, today we are having a couple of examples in Senegal in terms of the way we are using the budget. Yes, with JICA, we are getting what you call, direct general budget support that is landing to the government with the Minister of Finance for the health sector. Yes, it's working, but sometimes, yes, we are facing some slowness on the execution of the budget, because you have to all the way around getting all the different, signature from the Ministry of Health, Minister of Finance, going back to the Treasury, coming back, etc. But at the end of the day, the money is there and we are using it. But what is more difficult is the speediness of the execution, and sometimes the delay that we are facing on getting that. This is one. But as another example, I can give the example of one of the foundations that currently is working with our ministry, that I give as a grant for 100,000 million, but with direct support to the health sector. So this budget is being in our account at the Ministry of Health, managed by the ministry, personally as a coordinator of this project, because I've been nominated as the coordinator of this project. So all the stakeholders, all the beneficiaries, they just make the request, document with what they have to do, and send it to me. I study with the process, it is in line with what we have agreed, and then I give my agreement before sending it to the minister, who then says that, yes, it's okay. Once it's okay, you get the money immediately. So today we have this very nice experience that is showing that we can speed up the process, but not without also having the control. Because with this foundation, we are having a bi-weekly meeting on which we go all the process, all the document, all the fund, for what do we do, and we have milestones that can help us out to see if exactly we are on track or not. So these are just kind of examples. So if you want my personal opinion with this experience, I will say yes, direct support to the sector can be welcome. It's very nice experience. But however, we respect the donor, the partner, with their wish to do. If there is on budget support, we don't have to fear about. What we need to do is see how internally we can work on speeding up some processes, or even eliminate some bottleneck to make sure that this is happening. So be sure that, we are happy with what you are doing in Senegal, but we want you to increase the budget. Thank you.
We have 10 minutes left and only one last question before I have to conclude the session. So will you please stay on and talk to us after if you have a question. But yeah, one last question.
Thank you for the privilege of having the last question. My name is Chi Ling. I'm from Aquatech Collective. We're based in Singapore, and we build technology for low resource settings. And I have a question for Tessa, and perhaps other panelists can chime in as well. It's regards to capacity building. One of the models that Aquatech Collective has recently been experimenting with is to build systems with local partners, not just for local partners, and this includes even the long tail of maintenance. So instead of being a tech vendor, we partner with them and we actually cultivate local engineering capacity and capability to maintain these systems for the long run. But it's also a very new model, and I haven't really found yet a financing model in the development space that can truly support this in the long run. So even our fundraising activities would be quite segmented to still program specific. So I wanted to get your read and your sense of how do we truly incentivize local capacity building, especially given trade-offs. Some organizations also fear that if they do impart some of these skills, in the long run, they don't get the same kind of projects that they used to have. So there's a slight conflict of interest in some ways in development work that I've observed. And we're trying to experiment with a model that doesn't fall into that kind of pitfalls, but curious to hear your thoughts. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I give Tessie time to rest a little bit, but I think can Zara take on this question, because you've been doing a lot of capacity building as well with grassroots and local organizations. And Tessie, if you have things to add, you also jump in after.
Tuba, unfortunately, I don't think I can answer to the fundraising or financing element of this, because I think this is a challenge that my organization is also going through, particularly when you're trying to work long-term with partners. I mean, the first question that we always get with our partners is how do we sustain this at a long-term level? And you can teach an organization how to fundraise, you can teach them how to apply for grants, but the bitter reality is that the process of sustainability sometimes is so deep-rooted into colonization practices and having the hierarchy, having the platform, having the social media, which sometimes it's not accessible, for example, for small islands like in the Pacific where they have a massive digital divide. So I can't answer the question on financing. But in terms of capacity building, the way that my organization in particular works is that we work directly with our local organizations, and we try to equip them with any networks that we possibly can to sustain long-term relationships. And I must say it is very hard in the Pacific, again, with small island partners. We haven't really discussed the Pacific approach in this, but I must say working with the Pacific has been one of the largest issues that we've had, because there's a digital divide, limited finances, issues such as climate change, which are severely affecting their technology use as well, but also the knowledge that is in person and online. So I guess we've just been focusing on building networks, and that has been the strongest way that we've been able to amplify our partners. And I guess the sustainable approach in terms of leaving them with a solid foundation to be able to continue their work. But I must say, and I hope I'm not pessimistic, we are very worried when we do work with our Pacific partners. Because we recognize, in particular for unregistered organizations, there are so many different institutional barriers that I don't think aren't spoken about enough.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So then, in the audience, anyone could help to respond to this or share your experience in this space? No? Okay. Tessie, do you have anything to add before we
Well, why
conclude?
me? Sangeeta, Tidiane, any thoughts? I have some thoughts, but I'm sure you guys do.
Maybe, Sangeeta, you can take the capacity question.
I'm going to come at this a bit left field, because I'm actually not in the business of delivering these programs and funding. It's interesting to me that this conversation has gone from decolonization to localization, and then it's become a very process-oriented discussion. And I just wanted us to reflect on the fact that the theme of the conference is around politics and geopolitics. And I think there's politics in the process, but there's also political struggles that are at the heart of what these local organizations are striving for. And I just think it's important to keep coming back to those political struggles, because that's what decolonization is really about. So I think we can get quite overwhelmed by, I do actually appreciate the thoughtfulness around those metrics that you've described, but to me they also kind of sidetrack us a bit from the political dynamics, the power. I think we still haven't answered these questions about who's considered local and who's got the local voice, and that involves choosing one organization over another sometimes, and you enter the field of local politics, which is messy and it's difficult. So my general comment would be that we need to talk about process, but we also need to be thinking about the politics of this.
Yeah, I think that's actually a perfect, because I was going to ask you all about your final comment to the sessions. I take that as your final comment. And, you know, before I was going to have my own conclusion, but I think I would ask our panelists to leave the session with one key takeaway message of their thought about or advice or tips before we end the session. And maybe let's go from TDL and then Zara and then Tessie.
Thank you very much. I mean, key message today for the subject, the decolonization and localization, there are two things that I would like really to give as a comment for the key message. The first one is that, I mean, when we're talking about localization, it's a voice to be aware of there are challenges that you have to face. And your team needs to be prepared. So the key success for decolonization or localization is first preparation. It's just like an athlete. If you want to win the gold medal, you have to train yourself. How many times? As much as possible to make sure that the very day you will be performing enough to reach this gold medal. So preparation is key. You have to prepare your team enough ahead of time in order for them also to be on the most effective way to be successful. And last but not least, we need commitment. Commitment from the local leaders, commitment from the local community, commitment from the government, commitment from the donors, commitment from everyone, but as a collective plan. Let's plan together, let's design together, let's execute together, and let's be accountable of the results at the end of the day. Thank you.
I will be a bit more personal here, as I'm not sure if anyone was here yesterday, but I am a Palestinian and Iraqi woman. My family and I, we were affected during the Iraq War in the early 2000s, and we have still been rebuilding for 2 decades now, and we're now witnessing similar sentiments in Gaza and in the West Bank as well. And one thing that I've learned throughout this process of rebuilding is that we consistently are met with so much diverse knowledge from people on the ground who have been asking and begging for commitment and begging for change and asking for different solutions that they would like to implement. But I think, unfortunately, in particular, organizations who are philanthropic and who do have the funds, we are tied into the politics of things, as you were speaking about earlier. I guess, Tuba, just to be a little unconventional, I would really challenge our perceptions of listening to marginalized groups, and in particular, groups right now that are being persecuted worldwide. I guess there is a level of political bureaucracy that we recognize when we work with regions that are most affected right now. And I'm trying to be as diplomatic as possible, but I would really encourage everyone to truly listen to donors, to grantees on the grassroots. What do they want? How do they want to deliver their projects? Are we shifting the power back to them? Because I guess, Tuba, you can collaborate and we can speak about removing all of these different barriers. But I guess to me, the fundamental question that we always have to ask is that, is there going to be a power shift at the end of this project? And I'm really struggling, particularly in my home country of Iraq, to see a power shift within a lot of the localized projects.
Thanks, Sarah. And not in any way that I think that we can walk out of this room really have all the answers. And already we cannot answer to some of the questions you have, but this is a learning process. This is building our own capacities, having the language, the curiosity and the courage to embark on this process together. So yeah, thanks for asking the right questions. Tessie.
Well, so we're at time, and I'm not going to delay us, but I guess I would go back to, we have to be willing to take risks. The answer to the question about, well, how do we, get into this whole sector? Well, as long as procurement processes continue to be quite prescriptive and no one's really interested in, they pay lip service, but they're not particularly interested in listening to a new approach to supporting local capacity with new technologies, it's going to be really hard, right, to get in. I think I'm a glass half full person. I think the politics can be overwhelming. It is what deters risk-taking because, there are a lot of embedded notions of what's the best way to do it. And, politics also cut our cycle for innovation in this area. The fact of the matter is, there are some really interesting things that are happening in USAID and with other donors. Then, the political process means that the windows for really innovating tend to be really short, and these are long-term processes. So, easier said than done, to say, well, take a risk. I think organizations like mine can and should be taking more risk. I think it's harder for agencies, of governments to take those risks. So it's up to us to take more risks and begin to show how maybe we can do things differently. So that's all I got.
Thanks. Please join me to give a round of applause to our panelists today. And also thank you for your valuable 2 hours and your contribution. Please continue the conversation with us at FHI 360. We have an Asia Pacific office here in Bangkok. Come and visit us and talk to us as well. Have a nice evening and come back to PMAC. Thank you.